what we show is that these marginal tax rates do have an impact on foreign direct investment. There's a recent paper that's been out that sort of shows that for every point increase in the marginal effective tax rate, every percentage point increase, you cause foreign direct investment flows coming into, as a share of GDP, coming into a country to decline by 3.3%. So that's actually pretty dramatic. A lot of studies have shown that there is this negative relationship between these marginal effective tax rates and investment. And so, the key point in Alberta, we haven't raised the marginal effective tax rate, but other jurisdictions have been decreasing theirs tremendously, and they've gone to Alberta. And again, it goes back to this issue about whether you need a tax advantage to tilt the playing field towards yourself. I think that's important to maintain, and what I'm seeing now is that by 2013, that tax advantage in Alberta will be lost, and we're going to look no different than other jurisdictions in Canada and the rest of the world. Yes.
Jack, your idea of the 8% value-added tax, reducing corporate personal tax by 50% is interesting. Is that saleable? And what's the public appetite in trust factor if you shifted the tax policy that the government actually implement a 50% reduction if there was an 8% VAT?
Right. Well, the big problem is if people to believe it. In fact, the debate in the United States, although it's interesting, I think it's going to change in the United States, but there's been opposition to the value-added tax by both sides. The Democrats against it because it hits more of the poor, which is the argument that's often made against it. Although what most countries have done is had a sales tax credit at the low end to relieve low-income people from the sales tax. So that, to me, that issue is bogus. But and you can deal with it through that. The Republicans are opposed to it because it maybe gives another base, another source of revenue to governments, and that allows governments to get bigger. In fact, Larry Summers had a great quip about value-added taxes a number of years ago, where he said, if the Democrats looked at the value-added tax as a way of having bigger governments, and the Republicans looked at it as a way of taking taxes off the rich, then maybe the whole debate would change in the United States as opposed to the way that it was being framed. Very interestingly, because of the huge deficits in the United States and the very serious fiscal imbalances that are now in the U.S., there's starting to be some real serious discussion about whether tax increases are going to be needed in order to deal with that. And Nancy Pelosi, who's probably one of the least liked political figures in the United States these days, but she came last week mused about bringing in a value-added tax in the United States. And maybe in the next, if Obama wins the next election and has a second term, maybe he'll bite the bullet and try to introduce a VAT in the United States as a way of trying to deal with it. Here in Alberta, I know that people don't like general sales taxes. I know that it's been a historical thing in Alberta, and it's very hard to sell it for that reason. But if one could put in an ironclad maximum rate, let's say by legislation, or Alberta doesn't have a constitution, but there's no reason it couldn't adopt a constitution if it wanted to, but if it could put in some real ironclad things, even maybe subject to a referendum, that the income tax rate could never be increased without a referendum, then maybe that would be a real signal to people that, we'll bring in this value-added tax, but we're also going to give you the right to refuse tax increases. Now that, of course, is California's problem, because they've had these referendum, but Switzerland has had referenda for a long time, and so maybe there are some things in the process that could help sell the idea more better. But as we have an aging society, it's going to be very important to think about how we're going to deal with investment and savings, because productivity is going to be critical. Growth of the economy is going to be critical, and we're going to need to think about how to move away from taxing investment and savings here in Alberta, because otherwise it's going to be tougher to attract capital coming to the province.
First one, when you compare the provinces, you look at taxes, you look at revenues, does the issue of size of government and efficiency of government, how does that skew your studies in terms of, some of that paid for, and is it material or is it pretty neutral across Canada? And the second question is, curious as to when your review of oil and gas taxation and royalties is going to be complete.
It's actually, the number work is actually almost done. In fact, we've actually finished everything, except there's one thing I want to check, but then I'm ready to write it up. And my promise to the Department of Finance is because is that I would give them a warning when it's coming out. This is in Ottawa, because I work very closely with them. I give them theory, they give me data, so we have a good working relationship, but they want to make sure that they're ready for when we actually produce it. My hope is in November, so that'll be important. On government efficiency, that's really critical, of course. And in fact, when you look across OECD countries, they're not hugely different in terms of education and healthcare. There's all sorts of issues involved, and of course the U.S. and the healthcare system is very different than the way other countries behave. But they're all facing the same problems, and so you can keep taxes less certainly by having government efficiency. And that's part of the problem that's happened here in Alberta, is that Alberta's spending per capita now has gone to a level where, and I forget the exact number now, but it's significantly, before right now, is significantly higher than other provinces. In fact, when I was in Ontario, and I was commenting about how Alberta might have to do a 10 to 15% cut in spending, given what's happened to its budget recently, they said, oh, well, that means your per capita spending in Alberta will go down to the rest of us in Canada. But we also have to remember that Alberta's been blessed with having the resources in the ground to help fund a lot of things, and so that's allowed us to keep tax levels down, and it's allowed us to enjoy spending, and why not take advantage of those things. In terms of studies of OECD countries and the world and growth rates, it's very interesting what people have found today. First of all, it's been shown that income taxes undermine economic growth across countries. Countries more reliant on income taxes tend to have lower growth rates. Countries that tend to rely more on consumption taxes don't have any impact on growth rates. So the story there is that the more you rely on income taxes as a source of revenue, the more that you're going to undermine your economic growth. You're better off to shift to consumption taxes. That's the basic story on the tax side. On the spending side, what people have found is that spending on infrastructure and spending on education does boost growth rates. However, spending on other things doesn't. And so the worst combination is raising a lot of income taxes and spending it on a lot of things besides infrastructure and education. Because what that means is you're having a negative impact on the tax side and no impact on growth on the spending side. And I will say that Alberta, over the years, has at least put more into infrastructure compared to some of the other provinces. And I think that's been important, because that does help growth. It doesn't mean that all the infrastructure spending is wise, doesn't mean it's always efficient, and you can go into very specific details, but at least some of the priorities have been right on the spending side here in Alberta. But I think that the bigger problem, I think, has been on the tax structure side. I think Alberta's done a remarkably good job over the past number of years keeping taxes on work and investment relatively low relative to Canada. But what we've seen is really that whittling away of some of those consumption taxes in recent years. And I think Alberta needs to consciously think of a principled policy of where they would like the tax structure to go in the future. And of course, my recommendation is away from investment and savings and towards consumption, whether it's private or public consumption.
So Jack, thanks very much for coming out. Thank you for coming, everybody. Just one housekeeping note. On October 21st, the School of Public Policy has Frank Lentz coming, who's a very influential and controversial pollster.
That's been canceled.
Oh, it has been canceled.
Okay. Unfortunately.
Forget that housekeeping note. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Nice job.